passes.
Madam President, yesterday I came to the floor of the United States Senate to talk about the importance of promptly confirming President Trump's cabinet. The American people, having voted for President Trump, having said that they are unhappy with the direction the country is going in, is entitled to his team to help him actually do what he said he would do during the campaign. Well, today I'd like to reiterate that message. But in particular, I want to highlight some of the hypocrisy of our Democratic colleagues on this important matter as it pertains to our country's democratic processes. We know that our colleagues are frequently warning that ways of the Republicans are allegedly undermining democracy. But this is like the little boy that cried wolf. You cry wolf often enough, and people begin to believe that it's not really serious. And indeed, it shouldn't be taken seriously in the case of the allegation that Republicans are somehow trying to undermine democracy. Let me give you an example. Well, back in 2022, when Republicans passed state laws that included common sense election integrity measures like voter ID, Democratic leader Chuck Schumer criticized these initiatives, which were intended to ensure the integrity of our elections. You would think that would be a no-brainer, that everybody would want to embrace measures that would protect the integrity of our elections. But he claimed somehow it was an attempt to suppress people from voting. Well, I remember it wasn't that long ago when Barbara Jordan, a Democrat from Texas, revered justly as an incredible leader for our state and country, along with James Baker III, co-chaired a commission that came out with voter ID as one of the consensus recommendations. But now Democrats claim making sure that people are who they say they are and using the same sorts of things that you need in order to get on an airplane or to buy tobacco or a six-pack of beer, that somehow that undermines democracy. It just doesn't make any sense. But here's Senator Schumer on the Senate floor. He said, Republicans across the country are trying to stop the other side from voting. That tears apart, rips apart the very fabric of our democracy. I can almost see him crying crocodile tears as he says that. Well, I did a rough check a moment ago, and 152 million Americans voted in 2024. If Republicans were trying to suppress the vote, we're doing a lousy job, because you're seeing historic numbers of people, a lot of whom have not made a practice of voting before, showed up at the ballot box this time because they hated the direction our country was going in, and they felt like this was our last chance, perhaps, to save our country as we know it. Well, the senator from New York used this argument to advocate for changes to the Senate filibuster rule, the requirement you get 60 votes to close off debate, in order to pass what he called federal voting rights legislation. Well, first of all, what it would have done, it would have preempted the state's laws when it came to voting practices and created a single uniform standard here at the federal level, which would have prevented some of these common sense measures like voter ID from taking place. Well, President Biden also expressed the same sentiment. He pressed for the filibuster to be changed to advance his so-called voting rights package, saying that the package must be passed, quote, to defend our democracy. Well, actually, it would have made it easier to cheat. Now, ironically, they use the same argument for democracy to undermine the Senate filibuster, which is one of the bedrocks of this institution. But what I've noticed is that if an issue can be framed as a threat to democracy, Democrats throw any other concerns out the window. Hence, the sky is falling. More recently, in 2023, Democrats brought up the same question of protecting democracy as a reason to advance legislation addressing artificial intelligence. Well, as it turns out, artificial intelligence has been around for decades. It's recently captured the popular imagination because technology has taken us to places we never dreamed we could go. Well, in 2023, the Committee on Rules and Administration held a hearing on AI, and the Democratic leader said this: if left unchecked, here he goes again, he said, if left unchecked, artificial intelligence use in our elections could erode our democracy from within and from abroad. And the damage, unfortunately, would be reversible. This is a pretty common scare tactic. You scare people enough, well, maybe they're willing to let you do things that they otherwise wouldn't do upon calmer reflection. He went on to stress the importance of Republicans and Democrats working together to protect and reinforce our democracy. We're for that. But here's what he said: I can think of few issues that should both unite both parties faster than safeguarding our democracy. It will take all of us, the administration, the private sector, Congress, working together to protect our democracy, ensure robust transparency and safeguards, and ultimately keep the vision of our founders alive in the 21st century. Well, taken at face value, that sounds pretty good until you start beginning to look at the details about what he says we need to do in order to accomplish that goal. That's where you begin to see the huge disconnect. It's in pursuit of another agenda. Democrats have become the party that cried wolf, threat to democracy, and the more they say it, the less meaning it actually holds. For what it's worth, I agree that the administration, the private sector, and Congress should work together to protect rather than undermine democracy. We do have some different perspectives and points of view about how we might do it. That's a laudable goal, but not in pursuit of a purely cynical and partisan policy agenda. There's a very tangible way that Democrats can join with us to do this week. We can cooperate with the president and the people elected a commander-in-chief of the United States by confirming his cabinet. How's that for protecting democracy? The opposite, which is to stonewall the president's cabinet nominees, to burn as much time as possible before we're able to get that done, is not preserving and protecting democracy, it's undermining it. Our Democratic colleagues never seem to lose an opportunity to say that whatever the subject, it's a threat to democracy. But here they are today, participating in a campaign to stonewall President Trump's nominees, which I would argue is undermining the democratic process, is denying a elected president of the United States who won not only the electoral vote, but the college vote, but the popular vote as well, to deny him his team so he can actually get to work on January the 20th doing what he was elected to do. Just yesterday, Senator Schumer, the Democratic leader, came to the floor to air his grievances on each of the president's nominees for the cabinet. He argued that many of the policies they would implement would be disastrous. But the fact of the matter is, the American people have chosen. They did that on November the 5th when they went to the polls and they gave President Trump a substantial majority and even a mandate for a new direction in the country. They repudiated the failed policies of the Biden administration, starting with what's been happening at the border, which is an unmitigated disaster from a public health and public safety point of view. And if would indeed be a threat to democracy if our Democrat colleagues chose to ignore the will of the voters and deny the president his cabinet or delay it for no good reason and prevent these nominees from going to work to implement the policies that the American people elected President Trump to enact. Unfortunately, this is sort of reflexive. It's kind of what our Democratic colleagues do. I've been amazed to listen on television and hear in person for the last, however it's been, hour. Democratic colleagues have come to the floor to speak, but they didn't talk about the pending business, the Laken-Riley Act. This young woman who was killed by an illegal immigrant who should not have been in the country. I asked Pam Bondi, who's the nominee for Attorney General this morning during a confirmation hearing, I said, if President Biden and Harris had secured the border, do you think Laken-Riley would still be alive? And she said yes, together with many others who've been victimized by illegal immigrants who come across the border to do Americans harm in one way or another. Not all of them, but when you open the border to 10 or more million people, with 2 million of them gotaways evading law enforcement, you don't know what you're going to get. Well, I take that back. You do know what you're going to get. You're going to get some people who do not intend to come here for a better way of life. They come here to rape and pillage and rob and to commit crimes. Well, Republicans are tired of hearing excuse after excuse from our Democratic hearings, excuse from our Democrats. Some of these hearings are being delayed due to incomplete background checks. But ask yourself, who's responsible for the background checks? Well, it's Joe Biden's FBI. The FBI owes it to the American people to work around the clock, 24/7, to get these background checks done on a timely basis. Otherwise, we are literally undermining a democratically elected president. So I would urge our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to heed their own words when it comes to confirming President Trump's cabinet. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle like to talk a big talk about defending democracy. I'd like to see them put these commitments into practice by ending the undemocratic obstructionist tactics that they are using to deny this president his team. Madam President, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.